Hey, everybody. With so much going on around COVID-19, especially as it relates to what an employer can do, can't do, employee rights, hosting events, NAILBA knows all about that. We brought in an outstanding attorney to discuss this issue and give you the insight you need to make good decisions. Ed Easterly is the founding member of Hoffman, Hlavac, and Easterly. He practices before federal and state courts and labor and employment agencies and is admitted to the United States District Courts for the Eastern and Middle District of Pennsylvania, the United States Third Circuit Appellate Court, and the Supreme Court of the US. During this session, Ed is going to discuss the many ways in which the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted business as we know it, and especially employers. Legal issues that will be discussed include COVID-19 vaccines. Can you mandate? Can you card individuals? Furloughs, layoffs, the reopening of your workplace, mask mandates for employers, visitors, guests, and a whole boatload more. Ed's a fantastic attorney. He's a fantastic friend of NAILBA. He's presented a number of NAILBA webinars that have been extremely well attended. This is his wheelhouse. He provides the information on guidance on how to avoid lawsuits and provide direction to clients during these new business times. Without further ado, attorney Ed Easterly.
Hello, everyone. My name is Edward Easterly. I am here to talk to you for about the next half an hour about employment law implications of COVID-19. We're going to talk about a number of things today. We're going to spend the majority of time, however, talking about the COVID-19 vaccination, how that impacts businesses, whether or not people can require disclosure of vaccination information, how it impacts masking and protection of employees and those visitors coming in and out of your business on a regular basis, how it would impact any events you're holding, what you can do essentially as an employer and a business at this juncture as it pertains to COVID-19. Fortunately, it would appear, hopefully, that we are nearing the end of the most restrictive mitigation efforts that were put in place to prevent the spread of COVID-19. A year and a few months ago, we were giving these seminars and telling everybody what they have to do to try and protect their employees and what they have to do to try and protect their businesses and how to handle shutdowns and how to handle remote working and how to keep your business afloat. Hopefully we're past all that. And now we're moving towards, well, how do we handle this reopening? How do we handle our employees coming back to work? How do we deal with the COVID-19 vaccine? Because as everybody knows at this point, it's arrived. We're 7 months past the point where it has arrived at this point. The first vaccine was approved in December of 2020. There's currently 3 in the United States, and every few days they discuss who is going to be eligible to receive it. And individuals as young as 12 currently can receive the vaccination, the Pfizer vaccine. The last I saw, they were testing it on children younger than 12. Everybody has different opinions on the vaccine. You can talk to 10 people and get 10 different opinions. Some of them may be based on what they read on the internet. Some of them may be based upon what their cousin, brother, sister told them. But everybody has beliefs about the vaccine and what employers should do and what businesses should do and what companies should do as it relates to the vaccine. I am not here to give you opinions. I'm not here to tell you whether or not the vaccine is going to input a microchip from Bill Gates into your system or whether or not you should get it or not. That is not the reason for this seminar. What I'm going to tell you is the legal implications of the COVID-19 vaccination, whether or not an employer or a business can mandate it, whether or not they can require disclosure. We're going to get into the legal aspects of it, not opinion, not determining whether or not individuals, their beliefs are right or wrong. That's not what this is, the purpose of this seminar is. So what we're going to discuss is whether or not it can be voluntary, mandatory. Can you give incentives? What type of policies do you have to have in place? So we're going to start with voluntary, because voluntary is easy-ish. Nothing's easy right now. I know it doesn't matter what we're going to talk about. I could talk about 100 different things, and none of them would be easy because everything changes on a daily basis with regard to the pandemic. Things are opening up, things are changing every day, every single week. We are getting new guidance and new orders and new recommendations. So it's difficult to keep up. I understand that from a business and employer perspective, but everything we're going to discuss today is up to date, at least as of the day I'm speaking. So with regard to voluntary, can you make it voluntary? Well, yeah, that's an obvious answer, right? An employer, a business can say, listen, employees, if you want to get the vaccine, you're more than welcome to do so. I have not had a single company come to me and say, we're going to prohibit our employees from receiving the vaccination. No one's doing that. So if an employer wants to say, we are strongly recommending it, we really want you to get it, but we're not going to require it, that's perfectly okay. Why would an employer do that? Well, they don't want to get into the argument of, well, should we mandate it? Should we mandate it? I don't want to get it. What about side effects? What about this? What about that? I read this, I read that. We're going to strongly recommend it. It's the simplest way to do it. It's the easiest way for an employer to do it at this point in time from their perspective. They don't have to get into all this other stuff we're going to discuss about policies and procedures and exemptions and discuss determining whether or not somebody has a medical condition or a sincerely held religious belief. We're going to strongly recommend it, but I am still encouraging my clients to adopt a policy, even if you're just strongly recommending it. Because depending on what state you are in, certain states still have requirements to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. I'm in Pennsylvania. Our mask mandate is still in place for anybody who's not vaccinated, which means if I don't have a vaccine, then I'm still required to wear my mask in public settings and in places of employment, in businesses. That's the requirement. So even if we're just strongly recommending it from an employer's perspective, I would recommend you have a policy in place because you have to still have measures to protect employees if they're not vaccinated. Continued masking, continued social distancing, teleworking, all these things may still apply because an employee may not be vaccinated, and we still have an obligation to protect our employees by law. The bigger question, though, from an employer's perspective is, if I'm vaccinated, and it's just voluntary, can you require disclosure? So for example, we have, you run a business and we say, listen, if the mask mandate's lifted, we don't have to wear masks anymore if you are vaccinated based upon the CDC guidance from May 13th of 2021. Our states lifted the order, has indicated that if you are vaccinated, you don't have to wear the mask. So as a business, we don't want to force you to wear the mask anymore if you don't have to. But how do you know? How do you establish whether or not somebody has been vaccinated? Can you ask that question of, well, were you vaccinated? Were you not vaccinated? Why do you want to have that answer? Well, because again, we may want to lift mitigation measures. We may want to get back to normal in the workplace, but can you ask that question? Because I read on Twitter that you can't do it because it's a HIPAA violation. A company, a business can't say, were you vaccinated? I'm here to tell you that is not the law. It is 100% permissible for an employer to ask its employees, were you vaccinated? It's 100% permissible for a business to just ask people when they come in, were you vaccinated? That's a permissible inquiry. You are allowed to do that. Whether or not somebody was vaccinated is not a medical inquiry for purposes of the law. More importantly, the people who keep saying, well, HIPAA this, HIPAA that, HIPAA only applies to a limited number of entities. It doesn't apply to every single business and every single employer and every single individual that exists in the world. HIPAA is a law that prohibits medical personnel from disclosing your medical information. So I can't call your doctor and say, hey, I want to know all Dan's medical history. Give it to me. I need to know it. You don't need to know why. I need it. A doctor can't disclose that information to me because that could be potentially a violation of HIPAA. But an employer saying, were you vaccinated, has no HIPAA implications at all in any way, shape, or form. That is not accurate. So anybody's cousin's sister's brother who read it on Twitter is wrong, 100%. And as a lawyer, I don't generally like to do that. I don't generally like to say that's wrong 100% because I always like to leave wiggle room, right? That's generally the lawyer way. You have to answer a question, which leaves you some wiggle room, but there's no wiggle room on that. HIPAA is not implicated in this question. What is implicated, however, is potentially the Americans with Disabilities Act. There's state laws which protect people from discrimination. Because are you allowed to ask, were you vaccinated? Yes. Should that be instead of the questions you ask? Yes. We should not say, why didn't you get vaccinated? Because at that point in time, you're going to get medical information, religious information you don't want and you shouldn't have if all you're asking is, were you vaccinated? Can you require proof of the vaccination? Can you require somebody to give you a copy of their vaccination card? Yes. However, if you get that, that needs to be kept in a separate location. So the EEOC last week and a half ago, provided additional guidance where they answered all these questions and they corroborated everything we've been saying from the start about this. What they have specifically said, which confirms what we've been telling people, is if you get the vaccination card, that should be kept with the medical information that you keep for your employees. The law requires you to keep medical information separate from general personnel files. So you should have a file that says personnel information, hiring documents, evaluations, disciplinary actions, whatever. And then there should be a separate file for your employees for medical information. The vaccination card, proof of vaccine, should go in that medical file. But asking the question, 100% permissible. Why is this so important? Well, because if you are going to, again, loosen your restrictions, how are you going to establish that from the employer's perspective, from the business perspective? And depending on what state you're in, every state has different requirements. The CDC saying you don't have to wear a mask if you're vaccinated didn't do anything other than say, this is our recommendation. Individuals still need to comply with whatever the state law requirements are. So Pennsylvania, again, like I said, where I am, loosened mask restrictions, but they're still there. California still has significant restrictions in place. There are different states, Florida, Alabama, everybody has different restrictions for masking. But even with what the state laws are, there may be different business requirements. Again, it's no difference than no shoes, no shirt, no service. If a business said you have to wear a mask to come into our place of business, then individuals generally may have to wear a mask. When the CDC issued the recommendation about vaccinated people don't have to wear a mask, a lot of bigger businesses, Walmart, Targets of the world said, okay, we're going to go by the honor system. If you are vaccinated, you can come in here without a mask. That's great. That's wonderful for the individuals who can go in and don't have to wear a mask, that we're returning to normal. From an employer's perspective, though, if you go into Walmart or Target or one of those businesses, the majority of employees that I see are still wearing masks. Why is that the case? Well, because it's one thing to say we're going to allow third parties to come in and that we're not going to stand at the door and check everybody for vaccination cards. But from an employer's perspective, employers can treat employees differently than they're treating the third parties. If you're going to hold an event, if you're going to have a dinner, a social gathering for your clients, how are you going to handle that? Are you going to ask the question before the event occurs, are you vaccinated? Can you do that? Yes. Are you going to do it? That's up to you internally. And again, based upon whatever state law that is applicable to you. But you have to decide as a business, how are you going to handle it? From a legal perspective, I'm telling you, you could ask that question. If you're going to ask that question or not going to ask that question, there's different issues at play. Right? So from a business perspective, if you're going to hold an event that has third parties coming in, your customers, your clients, and you're just going to say, we're going honor system on this, you may want to have a document in place, a waiver in place, which says, listen, this is how we're holding this event. If you're not vaccinated, you have to wear a mask. If you are vaccinated, you don't have to. However, everybody has to sign a waiver, which indicates you understand the risks and you're relieving us from any potential liability. From an employer standpoint, again, you need to have policies and procedures in place that protect you. The biggest question, the biggest issue I keep hearing is, well, we don't want the people who've been not vaccinated treated differently than the people who've been vaccinated. That's legitimate, because some people may not be vaccinated due to a medical reason or religious belief, and they cannot be subjected to harassment or discrimination as a result of that. So you should establish a policy that specifically says, we're not going to require vaccinated people to wear masks. You have to provide proof of vaccination. Please be aware that not everyone who is continuing to wear a mask has been vaccinated. Some people may just choose to do so. You are not to question people about their vaccination status. You're not to question people about wearing a mask. If you do, you'll be subject to discipline. All of these things should be in a policy or a procedure. So that's all just the general voluntary information. Now we have this voluntary plus. Right? We're not going to require it, but we're going to give you a little benefit. So up until last week or so, the question was up in the air, can employers do this? Well, the EEOC has said yes, it is permissible to do a voluntary plus system to give a benefit. However, be careful. It can't be substantial or coercive. So they didn't give any definition of what substantial or coercive is, but if you're going to give $500, $1,000, that would likely be substantial. So it may not be permissible. They had the extra day off, a gift card, a small monetary incentive. That should not be deemed substantial or coercive. It may increase participation, it may increase morale. And I see this all over the place. Jersey had a beer and a shot promotion at some bars where you get a free beer if you get a shot. I think I saw in Oregon, maybe Oregon, there's a different promotion where you get, I think you get some marijuana for free if you get a shot. Everybody's doing different things. The EEOC has said it's permissible to give a bit of a benefit in order to increase participation, but there's still some concerns, at least from my legal perspective of this, because as we're going to discuss in a minute, there's exceptions to a mandation. If you have a religious belief, a medical issue that prohibits you from getting the vaccination, then an employer has to accommodate that. So the same theory would go, if I'm giving everybody who got a vaccine $1,000 and somebody can't get it because of a medical or religious belief, an employer may have to engage in an accommodation and say, okay, well, you can't get the vaccine, but you're going to do this, and you still may be entitled to the additional consideration or whatever incentive we're providing to those individuals who are getting the vaccination. So if employers are going with this voluntary plus, there still needs to be a specific policy and a procedure they're laying out to make sure that they are in compliance with the law. So that's all the voluntary information. Now we're going to get into the mandatory requirements, and this is a little more in depth. Right? We went through voluntary, we went through voluntary plus. And if I gave this seminar 2 months ago, 3 months ago even, the majority of my clients, the majority of businesses were not doing mandatory. What was the main reason? Well, the vaccine wasn't available to everyone. Right? You can't really do a mandatory policy where everybody has to get a vaccine that not everybody has access to. Well, now every person who is eligible, right? So as long as you're age eligible, has access to the vaccine. So I have a lot more clients now for mandating the vaccine than they were 3 months ago. Why? Because they want to have a safe workplace. That's the argument that they're making. They have employees that are saying, why aren't we doing this? I represent a number of healthcare institutions. They were not mandating it. Some are changing, some are not. Well, it depends on the organization. But they have a lot of companies are seeing employees say, well, why aren't you requiring this? I got it. I want it. Well, why aren't they doing it? The same reasons we talked about before. The 50% who want you to do it, there's 50% of the other employees who say we shouldn't be doing it. So employers are trying to thread that needle of what should we do and what are we required to do to protect our workplace. The question of can you mandate it? The answer is yes, 100% yes. An employer can mandate the COVID-19 vaccine. That EEOC guidance that I mentioned before confirmed that. We've been saying this for months, but the EEOC has confirmed it, said, yes, this is permissible to mandate it. Well, but Ed, I read on Twitter that because it's not FDA approved, it's just emergency use, an employer can't mandate it. Wrong. There is a lawsuit out there in New Mexico that is alleging this. I don't think it has much in the way of merit. The FDA emergency use language, there's specific language that they're referring to that basically says if something's an emergency use, it can't be mandated. Well, there's more than just that sentence. It says it can't be mandated unless people are told what happens if they don't get it. So there's more language than what people are referring to when they keep saying, well, it's not FDA approved, so you can't mandate it. That's not the bigger issue. The bigger issue, that has nothing to do with an employer, right? It has nothing to do with a private business. What governs you? The EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And they have said you can do this. So an employer can mandate it, but there are exceptions, which we're going to get into. But who can you mandate it of? You can employees, interns, applicants. You can say this position is contingent upon you receiving a vaccination. Events, you can say you can only come to my event if you are vaccinated. All of these things are okay. However, there are some exceptions, and you may be required to provide accommodations to individuals who cannot receive the vaccination, whether or not it's applicants, employees, third parties if you're holding an event. Or maybe we hold it virtual, there's continued masking. You may have to provide accommodations to those individuals who cannot get the vaccine for religious or medical reasons. That's it. It's not, I don't like it. It's not, I don't think, I think I'm going to get a microchip in me. It's not, I think it was rushed out. These are the only two exceptions, religious and medical. I'm in Pennsylvania, so every state has different laws, but the federal law is Title VII that requires employers to provide accommodations if somebody has a sincerely held religious belief that prohibits them from getting the vaccine. And what's the test? The test is the belief religious and is it sincerely held? And once that's established, it's on the employer, the business to determine whether or not they can accommodate it. So is the belief religious? The question here is it about life, purpose, death? It's not just, I don't like the vaccine. I don't think it's medically safe. I don't, my political beliefs don't encourage me to get the vaccine. Those aren't religious beliefs. Religious belief is a belief in something higher, life, purpose, death, not a personal belief about the vaccine. It does not need to be widely practiced. And this is, if you have any Seinfeld fans on this, it's the Costanza rule, right? And it doesn't have to be one of the big religions that everybody knows about. It can be Festivus, that only the Costanzas know about. But it is religious to me. It is a religious belief to me. And do I sincerely hold it? That's the next question. When an employer is getting into this analysis, or a business is getting into this analysis, they're not conducting an investigation. In reality, the question is, do you have a sincerely held religious belief, and what is it? And as long as that information that's provided is sufficient, we're done. The only time an employer would request additional documentation would be if there's some reason to question it, right? Ed has never, ever in his life engaged in behaviors that would lead me to believe he is a religious individual. In fact, I thought if he went into a church, it would burn down, right? That he is not a religious human being. And now all of a sudden, Ed said, I can't get the vaccine because of my religious beliefs. Well, in that case, an employer could say, Ed, we need some additional documentation. We need a third party to certify this. And once I give you that, that's done. We're done as a business, as an employer, engaging in that questioning. I have provided sufficient information. Now the only thing is, can we accommodate my request? So I can't get the vaccine. Can I still come to work? Can I come to your event? Can I come to your place of business? If I keep wearing a mask, if I social distance? If you can accommodate it, we have to accommodate it. That's religious beliefs. Then you have medical exceptions. This is the Americans with Disabilities Act. And again, whatever state law is applicable. We have the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act here. Every state generally has their own laws that provide additional protections above the federal laws. The EEOC, again, has corroborated that under the Americans with Disabilities Act, a mandatory vaccine policy is permissible because COVID-19 is a direct threat. So it's more of a harm to the public in the workplace than the vaccine could potentially be. So an employer can mandate it, but they have to also provide this exception if somebody has a medical condition that precludes vaccination. I have a severe allergic reaction to it. I'm pregnant and my doctor told me, I hope I'm not pregnant, but the employee may be pregnant, and it says, the doctor said you can't get it. Documentation provided to the employer says I can't get the vaccine. Employer, much like the religious part, has to engage in this interactive process, determine whether or not they can accommodate it. The EEOC has specifically said that at this point in time, you're generally going to be able to establish you can accommodate these requests because we've been doing it for over a year now. Masking, social distancing, teleworking, but there may be exceptions to that. Oh, we may not be able to accommodate it, but as an employer, you have to engage in that discussion. So what do you need? Policies, procedures, exemption forms. If you're going to mandate it, if you're going to require vaccines for events, you have to give people advance notice so they can comply. If you say, hey, Ed, tomorrow you have to get the vaccine, well, that's not sufficient time. You have to give people advance notice to get the vaccine and let them know what will happen if they don't receive it. You have to give them the ability to get those exemption forms filled out. These are all things that need to be included in a policy or a procedure that is communicated to your employees, or if you're holding events, to third parties. How are you handling these things? How are you dealing with them? There are other things that need to be dealt with from a vaccination standpoint. Pregnancy, I mentioned pregnant individuals. They have to be treated the same as anybody else who has an air quote disability, right? Pregnancy is considered a disability under the law. So if I'm pregnant, doctor says I can't get the vaccine because of my pregnancy, we have to potentially accommodate that. Compared to trying to get pregnant. I don't want to get the vaccine because I'm trying to get pregnant. I read somewhere I shouldn't get it. That trying to get pregnant is not a disability unless there's some other medical condition at play. The other thing employers need to be mindful of, the National Labor Relations Act. Most people hear that, zone out. I don't have a union. I don't care. The National Labor Relations Act applies to all employees, unionized or not. If you have a union, you have other obligations, have to comply with the CBA, may have to bargain over mandatory language. However, even if you don't have a unionized workforce, if your employees are complaining on Twitter about my employer's mandating the vaccine, this is terrible, you can't just fire them. They may be engaging in what's called protected concerted activity, which is the discussion of terms and conditions of employment. We've talked about this before in seminars I've done with social media issues. When can we fire somebody for what they post? What happens if they're defaming the company? You have to evaluate what they're saying and whether or not it's protected by law. And one of the biggest questions we keep getting is, what about workers' comp? Well, if it's voluntary, workers' comp's not at play. If you mandate the vaccine and somebody gets sick, somebody falls ill, that may be covered by workers' comp, but that's going to be dependent on your state law. Every state has different requirements for workers' compensation. Just to recap, what do you need to do? Determine how you're going to proceed. Voluntary, voluntary plus, mandatory. Have a policy. Inform your employees, your attendees, your third parties, whoever's going to be bound by the requirements here. They need to be made aware of what you are requiring and then implement. If you're going to have a requirement that somebody has to be vaccinated in order to get a job, notify them of that fact. Before we end, I just want to cover a couple of different additional issues from an employer or business standpoint for reopening. Right, a lot of places are reopening now. What do you have to do? There's OSHA guidance that you have to have a plan in place, a COVID prevention program. If you have been open or have had any employees in your place of business since this started, you should already have one of these. But if you don't, you need to get one in place before your employees come back to the workforce. You have to have procedures in place that still spread the spread of the virus. Wash your hands, cover your mouth, notify us if you're sick. All of these things should be set forth specifically in a response plan, a prevention program. That's required by OSHA. I talked a while about the masking. Should we continue to do it? All of these things fall within OSHA issues. If you're not providing a safe and healthy workplace for your employees, you could be subjected to an OSHA complaint, and then that employee would be protected from any retaliatory action. But finally, I want to talk about the additional reopening issues of what if you have somebody who refuses to come back to work? I don't want to come back to the workplace. I'm happy working at home. I've worked from home for a year and 3 months. I don't want to go back. Well, why? What's the reason? If there's a medical reason the person can't come back to the workplace, goes to what we talked about before. We may have to accommodate it. But what do you do as an employer? Get information, document it. Engage in that interactive process. Can you accommodate it? Can you not accommodate it? All of these are things you have to do as an employer. If somebody says, I can't come back to work, well, what's the reason? That's the first question you have to ask. If it's just, I still don't feel safe. I'm not getting vaccinated, but I don't ever want to leave my house again. I'm perfectly content being at home. There's no reason, medical reason behind it. Well, as an employer, it's up to you what you want to do with that individual. If you say you have to come back to work and somebody just flat out refuses, you technically can separate their employment, but you have to be consistent. You can't fire Ed because he doesn't want to come back to work, but keep Jill or fire Jill and keep Ed, because then what we're doing is treating people inconsistently, and we may expose ourselves to a discrimination claim. But what do we need to do as an employer? Evaluate the request, determine why somebody can or cannot come back to work, and then potentially accommodate them. This accommodation goes all the way back to the interview process. It's pre-employment issue. If I'm applying for a job and I tell you, listen, I can't come into your workplace for an interview because of X, we may have to accommodate that, but the same steps apply. We request documentation, we engage in the interactive process, we figure out what we can or cannot do to assist that individual so they can engage in the same procedures as everybody else. So what do employers need to do? Document the refusal, document the reason why, determine the reason. Is it medical? Is it not? Why can't I come back to work? If we have to engage in the interactive process, do so. But the key is be consistent. Consistency for all of your employees, consistency for all applicants, consistency for everybody who you are requiring things of. If we do that, we should avoid the claims that would arise as a result of all of these things we've discussed. So if you have any other questions, you can look at our blog. We try to keep people up to date on a regular basis about all of the different issues that come up, not only with the pandemic, but every labor and employment related issue. And I thank you all for listening to this presentation. I hope it was beneficial. Have a great day.